0. Okay. Plain. Hi, I'm Miss Sloan, and this is AP Biology Review on the Thursday before spring break, and we are motivated. All right, everybody in that wants to be in? Yes. Okay, Chapter 45, Community Ecology. Here is a list of things to know. Dun, 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 dun. Just glance through it, see if there's anything scary on there you want to make sure that I go over for sure. I did not put a diversity index question on the quiz tomorrow. Not that it's hard, but it's not on the quiz tomorrow. Okay. Are we good? Everybody get a chance to kind of skim over it? All right, sweet. All right, so we just want to remember that a community is several different populations interacting. Yes? Is that what chapter am I even on? Is that the right chapter, community ecology? I'm just talking. Okay. When you have to do, if you have to do, let's say on your test, a Simpson's diversity index, you're just going to follow your little handy dandy formula here. Okay. And so you have to add up the total number of species that you've got, right? Of each, the amount of each species. You've got to add that up as well. And then all you have to do is take the percentage that it is of the total number and square it, and then you just add them all up, right? So you're just taking the percentage, like what percentage is monkey, what percentage is anteaters. You square that number, sum them up, and that gives you your diversity index after you subtract it from 1. Okay, and that's in there as well. Any questions on that one? Okay. When we talk about islands, because this helps with what we were talking about just most recently too, we know, like I said it 1,000 times, so you're definitely going to get this right on the quiz if I ask you. The greatest biodiversity is if you're an island that is large and close, right? Because it makes sense, right? Because large has more opportunities, more spaces, right? For you to have that variety. And then close, it's easier access. We also have hit this several different times. You're going to have the greatest biodiversity closer to the equator because the money that we're following is the sunshine. And wherever we have more sunshine and water, we're going to have more. And if we have more plants, we're going to have more. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. All right. Then we had a couple words here. Habitat and niche. Habitat is where you where you live, and niche is what you do. Can two species indefinitely share the same niche? No, they cannot. What says you can't? Competitive. Yeah, he's saying it. What is it? Competitive exclusion principle. No two species can indefinitely occupy the same niche. What are the outcomes of that? What could happen? Think about your dog. You can have resource. You're right, sweetheart. Resource partition. You share, right? You break up the niche. The currently existing niche, you divide it out, right? Instead of all of them growing on the rock, you share the rock. I'll take the top of the rock. You take the bottom of the rock. The advantage of that is it decreases what? Competition. What's another option instead of sharing? One takes over. One lives, one dies. Exactly. Okay. Then when we talked, another item about niches is we talked about fundamental versus realized. Fundamental is the complete range. Realized is really where you hang out. You know how you can think about this? You have your whole home, right? That you live in or apartment. So think you've got the whole house. Where do you spend most of your time? In your room or in the kitchen, I bet, right? Maybe you're in the living room watching TV. Right? So your fundamental niche is you get the whole house and the entire backyard. That is your family's area. But your realized niche is where you actually exist, right? And by doing that, you decrease competition because you're in your room, your siblings are in their room, or however that works. Yeah? Okay. And then we talked about specialists versus versus generalists, and the ones we worry the most about are the specialists because they have a very narrow range, and that's fine as long as it's very stable. That was the word I was looking for. Exactly. If it's very stable and continuous and it doesn't change, that's fine, right? But where there is flexibility, it's better to be a generalist than a specialist. Yeah, because you can live in a broader range of areas. Yay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, gosh, she's scared me. I don't know why you're talking to me. Okay, I already talked to you about the competitive exclusion principle. So you either do resource partitioning resource partitioning, or one lives and one dies. That was terrifying. Okay, now, what, you okay? Okay, deep breaths, deep breaths. Okay. Now, when you do resource partitioning, when you divide it up, let's say you're going to live on the top of the rock and another species is living more on the bottom of the rock. Maybe if you're living on the top, Tamir, are you doing something? I think it's you.
What?
If you're living on the top of the rock, maybe you're getting pounded by the waves more, so you have to attach a little bit better. If you're at the bottom of the rock, maybe there's currents and you have to attach differently. I don't know, but these are just examples. Here on the Galapagos Island, if there is resource partitioning, and so some are eating large seeds, some are eating medium seeds, some are eating small seeds, then you could have your characteristics could change slightly and you have character displacement. That character displacement could lead to what? Speciation. Yeah, could lead to speciation. Okay, coevolution. So you can evolve mutualistically, right? A flower and a pollinator mutualistically co-evolving to make a better and better match. It could be because one's predator and one's a prey, and you're still co-evolving, you're pushing one another. Okay, keep in mind when you talk about coevolution, you're talking about two different species. Okay, so it's not like you and your best friend and you both go on runs together and you keep encouraging one another to run faster. That's not it. Okay, it's two different species pushing one another to be their best self. Okay, now some of the things that can happen in communities is you could need to defend yourself when, because you could be defending against somebody else in your population, like if a plant's trying to grow taller than you and shade you out and it's even one of your own, right? We talked about that in population ecology, but in community ecology, these are two different species. And so you could have an herbivore that wants to eat you, and so you produce toxin or spines in order to protect yourself. Something else could want to eat you, and you advertise that you're poisonous. You have warning coloration. You could hide and try to be cryptic, like what we see over here, or you could do fright. This is because you're interacting with other species that either want what you want or want to eat you, etc. Are we good on that? So that's why we talk about here in the community dynamics. So differentiating between these two types of mimicry, Batesian versus Mullerian. Okay. The way I remember Mullerian is it has two L's and I think two what? Two stingers, right? I'm a bee, you're a wasp. We're both black and yellow, but we each have street cred. We both have stingers. And it basically increases the learning curve. You just know, stay away from anything black or yellow. They're probably not a good thing for you, right? Batesian mimicry is we have somebody else who's black and yellow, but they have no stinger. They're trying to get the predator to take the bait so that they'll think they're like us who actually have stingers. Okay, so that's a Batesian mimic. So where do you run into problems with this type of mimicry? Too much Batesian, not enough Mullerian, right? Because statistically, if black and yellows are not all bad, then you're not worried about them, right? You'll go for it. You'll take the risk. All right, and so here was a flower fly. This is a Batesian mimic. Looks like a bee or a wasp, but it's tasty. Okay, species interaction, competition, we both talked about that. When you're competing against each other, it's negative, negative. Predation, it's good for whoever's eating, bad if you're the prey. And then there are other symbiotic relationships. We just talked about these three. Parasitism, one benefits, they're the plus, one loses out like a tick on a dog, right? The tick is the parasite. What kind of parasite is that if it's on the outside of the dog? Ectoparasite. Good. But if your dog gets worms, it's a endoparasite. Commensalism, you don't care. It's, one benefits, like if you don't really care about your dog and it doesn't come out of your money, and you don't have to clean up dog poop and you don't care about your dog, it might be commensalism for you because it's good for the dog. They get a food, they get shelter, and you're like, whatever, and you don't do anything with your dog. Okay. Mutualism is you love your dog, the dog loves you, you're both benefiting from that. For instance, we have symbiotic bacteria in our urinary tracts that take up space so that bad bacteria don't live there. They have a place to live, and we don't have any bad bacteria, so that would be mutualistic. Okay, we looked at the acacia tree and ants. Remember all those different examples we looked at? I had you read that article. Good. Are we good on those three? So we could differentiate between them and not miss it. Good. All right. Then, as always, continental drift has something to say about this. So depending on what community interactions you have is going to depend on the climate, right? It's going to depend on your ability to access a different area. So that continental drift, the moving of the plates, is going to impact what communities are living where. All right, now, things change over time. What is that called? It starts with an S. Succession, okay? Primary versus secondary succession. Primary succession, you're starting with what?
You have rock.
Just rock. Yeah. You have a new volcanic island, right? That is primary succession where you're at rock. That's going to take you longer. You're going to need weathering. You're going to need little plant roots to go in there and break that up until you get soil. That takes a lot longer. Secondary succession. Farmer Ted has been farming the same field for 50 years and he retires and he just sits on his porch and drinks lemonade. And his field is going fallow. And then that kind of succession where it becomes the forest that he carved his farm out of, that would be secondary succession. You already have soil. After a forest fire, that would be secondary succession because you already have soil. The tree and the vegetation is gone, but you still at least have soil. Okay, good on those two? Okay. And then when we talk about disturbance, there's the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which basically says you don't want to just leave it alone forever and ever with no disturbance. The disturbance can be good. A fire can be good because it takes the carbon and the nutrients that are wrapped up in dead material and gets it back into the soil. You might at first initially your colonizers, remember when we talked about R selected versus K selected, and when the fires happened here in our community or out in Wood Ranch or over in Malibu, the first ones are colonizers over competitors. You're going to get those fast growing grasses and monocots and weeds that are going to take over. And then eventually you get your larger bushes and then your climax community, whatever that might be, trees if you have enough water. But you don't want it too much or too often. You want an intermediate disturbance and somehow that maintains the greatest biodiversity. Okay. Such a long chapter. But the second part was really pretty easy. Remember, this is where we looked at autotrophs versus heterotrophs, right? Okay, so plants are at the bottom of what kind of food chain or food web? Grazing, that's right. They didn't say it. Okay, grazing food chain. You have plants are always at the bottom. And what trophic level is that? 1, the first trophic level, right? Then who eats the plants? Primary consumers. Give me another name for them. Heterotrophs. Give me another name for them. Herbivores. Perfect. Who eats the herbivores? Secondary consumers. Heterotrophs. Carnivores. Good. Okay. Now the producers were at what trophic level? 1. The herbivores.
2.
And the carnivores would be 3, possibly even 4, right, as we work our way up. Okay, now if I want to add them up, I could do a pyramid of numbers where you just take each of the trophic levels and you stack them on each other, right? But we know, let's review our laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics says that it can just, and the second law says every time you lose some mass, and we can measure how much gets moved. And we say it's only what? 10%. So when we stack up our trophic levels, it should only be, the next level should only be, that next level in our pyramid should only be 10% of the first level. And then the third level should only be 10% of the second level, and so on and so on and so on, right? Because that's all that gets passed on. Perfect. You learned so much. So here are heterotrophs, consumers. Remember, I forgot to mention this. Autotrophs have the ability to take inorganic molecules and make organic through carbon fixation, right? Whether their energy comes from the or by breaking molecules, right? Whereas heterotrophs, we need to consume preformed Organic materials, good. Okay, herbivores, eating anything plants. Carnivores, secondary consumers. Good. Omnivores eat both, so they kind of fall in the middle there. Decomposers are at every level. Yes, at every level. So it's hard to put them on those pyramids, right? Because they're really on every single level. All right. We already did this. Yeah. Can I keep going? Okay. And food webs better express the ecosystem than a food because it shows all the interactions. Okay. And I want you to think if you had just three, a triangle, right? Three in your ecosystem. If you break one of those chains, the whole thing's going to fall apart, right? Because you don't have anything to balance it out. But if you have 15 all interacted and you break one of those chains, do you see how it can be more resilient in the process because you have all those different connections? So the greater the biodiversity, which is what we were talking about in chapter 47, the more resilient that ecosystem is, right? And there are sometimes in our food chains, there could be a key thing, like in the water, it could be krill, right? So that could be a key part. So when you lose that key part of that ecosystem, that would be really bad. Okay, grazing versus detrital food web. A detrital food web, you're starting with those decomposers, right? Eating like pee, poo, whatever. That sounds terrible. Trophic levels, we already did. We're good on that. Okay. We already talked about ecological pyramids, right? And we said this was a poor model because what? No decomposers and not 10%. So you could have a pyramid of numbers, which often works. If you just number of plants, there'll be fewer herbivores, there'll be fewer carnivores. The exception to that, what was the exception to where the pyramid of numbers doesn't work? Okay, that's a pyramid of energy one, but do you remember the tree, one tree, and you could have millions of ants on it, right? So if you counted it, it's like 1 and then 1 million. So that doesn't represent the pyramid well, right? So in that case, you might do biomass where you weigh it, and one tree would weigh more than the biomass of a million ants, yes? And the exception to that was the algae, right? Because the algae, you could have a small amount of algae, but they're such excellent producers, they can support a large amount of zooplankton or other things, right? So the better one then was not the pyramid of numbers, not the pyramid of biomass, but the best one would be the pyramid of energy, following how much energy is at each level. Okay, now reservoir is where it's stored. You can remember that. Water is stored in a reservoir, right? Okay. Then the exchange pool, that sounds like something you would remember. We're exchanging, right? And generally speaking, the exchange pool is where the plants or the autotrophs have access to it. Then once the plants have it, you're in the community, right? Because herbivores can eat the plants and carnivores can eat the herbivores. All right. Then we went through and we talked about the water cycle. That's your easiest one. Rain comes down as precipitation. Okay, you could have underground pools of water called aquifers. You can have evaporation out of water, bodies of water. You could have evaporation out of plants. That's called transpiration, or you might see evapotranspiration. Those are the key parts of the water cycle. And then with each one of these cycles, we look to see how man screws it up. What do we like to do with water? We like to pollute it or waste it. Those are our two top things. Pollute the water or we waste the water, right? Because we're using drinking water to water our plants. Really stupid, right? Really stupid. Okay. Carbon cycle. Big things in carbon cycle is you want to think what removes carbon, and there's only one thing. Photosynthesis is the only thing that removes carbon from the atmosphere. What puts carbon up into our atmosphere? Cellular respiration, decomposition, because they do cellular respiration, right? And what else? Combustion, which is any kind of engine or motor for the most part, right, is going to increase the CO2. So then what we want to remember there is we want to remember that all cells do cellular respiration, right? So if I talk about gross primary productivity and I'm a plant, that's all the photosynthesis I'm doing. But as a plant, I'm also going to have to do what? Cellular respiration. So I got to take away that energy and you're left with my net, okay, productivity. And that's what can get passed on along the food chain. All right. Okay. How do we screw it up? Way too much combustion. right? And also we're getting rid of the photosynthesizers. Okay, hashtag poor choice. Okay, oh, I already talked about that. Are you good with that? CO2 fluctuations, we see that. You can see the mean value is going up, right? Hashtag sadness. But we see those fluctuations, and those correspond with in the northern hemisphere where all the land is. She's bringing the heat, I'm telling you. All right, phosphorus cycle. The reservoir for phosphorus is in rocks, and to get it out of the rocks, you need some weathering, some rain in order to bring it out of the rocks. And when that happens, it's normally immediately used by plants because it is a limiting factor. There's not a lot of it, but once plants have it, we need phosphates too, right? What do we need phosphorus for? ATP, right? That's like our energy currency. What else? DNA, RNA. Those are important, right? Okay, so we all need that. So plants get it first, then we eat plants, or we eat animals who have eaten plants. But can you ever have too much of it? Yes, and that's over enrichment of a body of water. And what's that called? Well, it will cause that, but what do you call it first? Over enrichment is called eutrophication. Yeah, eutrophication. And that over enrichment could then lead to a, which you would think their plants are doing photosynthesis all as well. But all those plants, you're not going to be able to sustain that. They're going to what? And they also block light from other plants at the bottom of the water. They can't do photosynthesis, so they die. Who works on them? Bacteria decomposers. Doing what process? Cellular respiration, sucking all the oxygen out of the lake. Death of the lake. Sad. Okay. That's how we screw it up. Where does this over enrichment come from? Runoff from dairy farms, homes, industry, etc. Okay, nitrogen cycle. Probably the most complex one, but I bet it's the one you know the greatest. What is the reservoir for the nitrogen cycle? The atmosphere. So let's do it together. You ready? Okay, so the reservoir up in the air, right? N2, we're going to do nitrogen fixation, forming what? Ammonia with nitrogen fixing bacteria. Then we're going to do nitrification. That's another whole set of bacteria. First, nitride, nitrate. You can serve this up to plants, and then animals can eat the plants, and then the animals and the plants die. Who works on them? Back to ammonia. What? Nitrite. Nitrate. Now, there's other ways to get nitrate besides this nitrogen fixation and nitrification. We don't have to go down and across. We can go direct to how? Lightning. So that's atmospheric fixation, or industrial fixation takes us right to nitrate. Could that cause over enrichment of a body of water, eutrophication, death of the lake? Yes. Okay. How do we return it to the atmosphere? Denitrifying bacteria. So bacteria do this, they do this, and they do this. Bacteria important? Yes. Sweet. Okay. Uh-oh. Pollutants, acid rain, bad. Any questions? Okay, super smarties. You got this. They are super smart.